Josh Shapiro, of course, is our state's Attorney General, former chair of the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners, former state rep. Quite a fascinating CV for someone so young seeming.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Attorney General. So, Josh, you've known me for a long time. You know that I'm an investigative reporter. And so what I've tried to do with our guests here is to dig up something to begin the conversation with. With Rebecca Reinhardt, it was her nickname of Becky when she was growing up in Abington, which for some reason mortified her.
Right around the corner from where I live right now, actually. The next street over is where
she
grew up.
Yeah. Is that right? Wow, political geography. And with Mike Tolan in our discussion about the Jordan documentary last year, it was a photo of him from 40 years ago in a Harry Callis-like plaid jacket with a what is commonly referred to as a Jew-fro. So I put my skills.
By the way, I hope we'll talk about The Last Dance here in our time together. I've got a lot to say.
I bet you do, which is related to my investigation of you, because I have long felt, I have a built-in political BS detector. So I always thought that this idea that you had game when it comes to basketball was probably just hype, right? Because we're both American male Jews, and we represent basketball players. We don't dominate on the basketball court. So I did some digging, and I have to say, because I'm fact based.
Okay.
All the reports, and I talked to one former teammate of yours at the illustrious Akiba Cougars, I believe it was.
Yeah.
You have game by all accounts. I was told that you were a cross between Steve Kerr and John Paxson.
Wow. That is
so I give it to you. And actually that is the first question I want to ask you about, because that relates to your sort of aha moment in a way about becoming a public servant. Something happened to you vis-a-vis basketball that led you to want to serve. How did that happen?
Well, you really are a hell of an investigative journalist here. If you dug this up, look, just first off, I'm really glad to be with you, and I hope everybody watching is healthy and safe, and we're going to get through this together, gang. And I'm glad to be able to hopefully provide you with a little bit of a break from the cable news and the challenges out there to talk about something else. And so here's what happened, right? In high school, I played basketball and I was fairly decent at it. And we won our championship my senior year. We worked really hard at that. And I went to the University of Rochester to try and walk onto the team. I thought I had a pretty good shot of being able to do it. It's a Division III school. They didn't do scholarships or anything like that. And I also wanted to be a doctor like my dad. My dad is the local pediatrician. And in my first campaign for state rep, Larry, I knocked on 18,000 doors. And each one of them, I wanted to tell people about my grand plans for Pennsylvania. And all they wanted to do was tell me how they took their kids to my dad when they were growing up, right? So these are my points of influence, or my points of reference. So I get to the University of Rochester, and it's my freshman year, and I'm going through the tryouts, right? It was really rigorous, 5 a.m. practices, whatever. And I'm studying pre-med. And I guess it would have been about 3/4 of the way through my first semester. 3 things happened on the same day. I went to basketball practice, and afterwards, the coach pulled me aside to tell me that I wasn't tall enough, I wasn't fast enough, and while I had a lot of heart and worked my ass off, I was not going to make this basketball team. And I was crushed. And later that day, I went to one of my pre-med classes, and it's one of those big lecture halls, a couple hundred kids, whatever it was, students. And afterwards, the professor singled me out and asked me to come down and talk to him. And he handed me back what was, I guess, the major exam you had for that class, because we were nearing the end. And I still remember this. The exam was out of 165 points, and I got a 4, like 4 total points, and 2 of them you got for putting your teacher's assistant's name correct. So I really got a 2 out of 165 or 163. And he said, "Look, I can tell you studied, and I was a good student. I worked hard, but this may just not be the right subject matter for you." So I came back to my dorm room thinking, okay, now I got to call my dad and tell him I'm not going to be a doctor, and tell him I got cut from the men's basketball team at the same time. Oof. And before I could do that, I got a knock on my dorm room door. And someone came in and said, "Would you run for the student senate?" That's what they called it there, the student government. I thought, why would I ever want to do that? That's not at all my interest. Never really been all that interested in that. Although I'd been involved in advocacy and civil rights growing up, I didn't want to do politics or anything. And he goes, "Look, you should run. You got nothing else going on in your life right now, and you're going to win." And I said, "Well, how do you know I'm going to win?" He goes, "I don't think anybody else is going to run, so it'll be yours." And thus began my political career. Through those 2 failures and knockdowns, I actually was able to realize what my true passion was. And obviously one thing led to another. We can get into all that, but that is the day, my freshman year of college back in 1991, that made me realize that I wanted to do politics, not medicine or basketball, although I still wouldn't mind playing basketball. So.
But also, unlike, so like I grew up and was enamored with Bobby Kennedy, but you,
sure.
But you didn't. You grew up and because your mom was like a school teacher, right? So you service. It was more service than politics that you were interested in at an early age, right?
Right. Totally about service. And even though I wasn't interested in like sort of politics and government, my family was really involved in civil rights. My mom was the local chairwoman of the Soviet Jewry movement. When I was a young boy, I was 11, 12 years old. I helped start an international pen pal program to write to these Soviet Jewish children. And the one that I had, what they called back then, twinned with, the one that I had been matched up with, and encouraged others to write letters to. And so I was able to turn that into advocacy to go to Washington and draw attention to him and his family. I still remember meeting with Senator Specter and Senator Biden and other people that were able to sort of work with the State Department. And, just a week before my bar mitzvah, when I was 13 years old, we got this kid and his family out of the Soviet Union. He came to Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, and was bar mitzvahed with me. And that really was a moment where I didn't realize so much that was about politics, but I did realize the power of someone's ability to organize, right? The power to see something and get after it and fight for it. And my mom taught me a ton about that. And I think those are the skills, combined with the failures in college and other failures along the way that taught me about my desire to do service and my desire to use this process to affect change for the greater good.
I love that. And of course, I love one of the great forgotten stories of Philadelphia is this Free Soviet Jewry movement started by, among others, Connie and Joe Smuckler.
Correct.
And the amount of refuseniks that they is stirring, and it was mostly housewives who organized. And it's and I remember talking to you about this at Joe Smuckler's funeral.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward because I feel like the one constant in your career has been reform. I first met you were in the State House. You do zero-based budgeting at Montgomery County. And in some ways, you then have this gargantuan challenge of reform, because I don't know if people remember, but before 2016, the Attorney General office was in shambles. Your predecessor had been convicted and went to jail.
Yeah.
How do you, as a leader, right that ship? What are the reforms that you undertake to turn that around?
Look, I think first and foremost, you have to set a tone. You have to make it clear what you value, right? I made it very clear we value integrity. I make it clear who we're there to work for. And then I surround myself with smart, diverse people who think differently than me, right? I want to be challenged every day when I go to the office. I don't want a bunch of yes men and yes women. And now today, if you look at the Attorney General's office, I think we're known as not just an office that delivers for the people of Pennsylvania, but one of the top 3, 4, 5 in the entire country. We've assembled the strongest, smartest, most diverse staff in the history of Pennsylvania. We've got more women in positions of leadership than men. Communities of color and our LGBTQ brothers and sisters are represented around both the big tables in my office and the small tables where decisions get made. We've got people from all across the Commonwealth. And when we sit down and make a tough decision, I was just on a call earlier with my senior team working through one of these tough decisions. I want people who listen to me and say, okay, General, that's fine, but here's what I think. And maybe you should look at it that way. And I think the more you can have those competing thoughts and people challenging you and people coming to the job with different experiences, my top aide, my first deputy, she's been a prosecutor for nearly 30 years. I campaigned on the fact that I had never been a prosecutor. I want those different opinions in the office challenging me. Now, at the end of the day, I get to make that final call, right? And they understand that, but it's a collaborative process. We also restructured the office in a way that we not only value diversity and we value strength, but we value integrity. We have the first chief integrity officer ever in the history of the Commonwealth. We work very, very hard to make sure that, every decision we make, whether the public agrees or disagrees with it, I'm mindful of the fact that people disagree with the decisions I make, that they can never look at it and say, they didn't do it with integrity. They didn't really examine the facts and the evidence and the law. And that's what I want people to know in the AG's office, is that we take that very seriously, and that's central to everything we do, integrity.
At some point, you did something that I don't know when, but I remember reading that you admitted that you had misjudged some of the people you inherited. That I mean, that just saying that was an explain what you realized about your preconception.
Sure. So let's go back. It's 2016, and I'm running for this office, an office where the Attorney General was under investigation for public corruption, and then charged with public corruption. Eventually, obviously, went to jail, and the office was reeling, and they really weren't doing big work. They didn't have any major investigations, and it didn't seem like a lot was happening. And when I was out campaigning, I was very, very critical. I was critical not just of my elected predecessor, but I was critical of the whole office. And I got in, and obviously I made substantial change, brought a lot of people in, and we've rebuilt the office too. I mean, because of her, we had lost hundreds of people from that office. We've now rebuilt it thanks to the legislature on a bipartisan basis investing in our office. But here's the thing. One of the things I wanted to do from a reform perspective was I wanted to have opportunities where all the lawyers and all the agents, and we're an office of about 1,000 people, got together for retreats regularly so we could talk and we could learn and there could be more training. So we had our first one, I don't know, Larry, 4 months in, 5 months in, something like that. And I asked to speak to everyone at the beginning of it and kind of set the tone as to what I wanted to come out of these few days we were all going to be together. And I had all these prepared remarks. And the truth is, I got up and I looked at everybody there. Some new people, but a whole lot of people who had been there, who I had gotten the experience over a few months of working with and seeing the quality of their work. And I just stood up and I said, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry that I judged you broadly the way I did. I'm sorry that when I was out campaigning, I was critical of the entire office. The truth is, I should have been critical of my elected predecessor only, and that there are some incredible public servants in this office. And I apologize to you. And I'm here to tell you that I'm going to run through brick walls for you. I'm going to work for you. I'm going to do everything I can to take your great skills and do my part to put them to use for the people of Pennsylvania. And that set a new tone. And actually, it's interesting you should bring that up, because a lot of folks in the office pointed out to me that was meaningful to them, that someone in my position apologized to them for how they were treated, not just by me, but by others over the years before.
I think it's a fascinating anecdote of leadership in action, and the degree to which being vulnerable is an act of leadership. And the attorney general offices intrigue me, because you know that one of my complaints with political leadership is the perpetuation of small ball, that incrementalism rules the day. And that goes for every elected office except for attorney generals. And I wonder if, like, starting with, I kind of think that starting with Eliot Spitzer, that the office back 15 years ago, the office changed. It's the one office where big fights are undertaken. And like, in reading about you, like, all you've done is fight. Whether it's the church, whether it's the political corruption, 60 politicians that you've prosecuted for corruption, big pharma. I happen to think the church is, I want to delve into that a little bit, but I happen to think the UPMC Highmark case was a really good example of what I'm talking about, this sort of using the bully pulpit to get big things done. Was that your vision of the office? Because it does differ. It is riskier than most. A lot of times you're going up against deep-pocketed political institutions.
Every time. And look, the bigger the fight, the better, if it means standing with the people of Pennsylvania. Look, I ran to be the people's attorney general. I said that when I was campaigning. I've said that, many, many, many times since. I see every day, and I've seen this for years, that most people end up getting screwed by big institutions, not just here in Pennsylvania, but all across the country. And then you've got a subset of society that thinks that the rules don't apply to them. And so when I take on a big fight, whether it's protecting survivors of abuse at the hands of a predator priest, or standing with 2.3 million Western Pennsylvanians against two healthcare giants to finally, after 10 years, bring them together to make sure that they would have access to healthcare, or the big fights to protect our planet every day. I mean, this is work that I said I was going to do and that we've done. We are, in our office, fearless. We know that when the facts and the law and the evidence are on our side, we will run through walls for the people that we're sworn to represent, because otherwise no one will. They're going to be just left outside. Look, we're seeing it now, Larry, in the midst of this COVID-19, right? You've got this group of people who have means, who have the ability to remove themselves from society and protect themselves. And then you've got others who have to go to work every day. And they're essential frontline workers. They're working in grocery stores. They're working in Amazon factories. And by the way, the folks working in Amazon factories can't even get a damn mask to wear. I had to go with my fellow attorneys general and take Amazon on to get them the PPE that they need. There are people each and every day who are struggling, who don't get a shot, and who feel like government isn't there for them. By the way, that explains a lot of the rise of Donald Trump. We can talk about that too. But it is my job to make sure that they have an advocate. And importantly, it's my job to make sure that the rule of law applies fairly across the board to everyone, no matter what you look like or where you come from or who you love or who you pray to or choose not to pray to. That's the greatness of this job, is that it gives someone the opportunity to do that. We're just doing it in a way that I think Pennsylvania hasn't necessarily seen before. And, we're really proud of the work we do.
That sort of makes you an unlikely populist, right? You're seen as an establishment because you carry yourself as an establishment politician, but you actually, but everything you just outlined and your record is that of a populist, the lawyer for the people. And I wonder if that's if the job brought that out in you. Yeah. Are you more outraged at injustice now than when you were a state rep, for example?
Okay, so you asked two questions. I think I've always been a populist. And if you go back and examine my record, the things I did in the state house, taking on leadership there, bringing about a new speaker, the different legislative things I accomplished, and then coming to Montgomery County, taking on entrenched interests. I was the first Democrat in 140 years to lead that county. And as you said, we did zero-based budgeting. We took on entrenched interests. I think I've always been a populist, and you're right. You get tagged with being establishment, I think, the moment you get elected. So it sort of is what it is at this point in my career. But I would say to the second part of your question, yeah, I'm more outraged now than probably I was even 10 years ago. This job has shown me the power of, some of these massive corporations to wreak havoc on people, to pollute their planet, to try and undermine their healthcare, to really harm them in ways that they have no recourse. Because, by the way, if they are able to go file a suit, then they get run over by just a legion of lawyers who know how to take advantage of them and push them down. Or if they're the victim of a crime, particularly when that crime is coming at the hands of a massive institution like the Roman Catholic Church, they feel like nobody's going to listen to them or believe them. And so I do have a unique front row seat to that injustice now, but I also have the ability to do something about it now, both from the standpoint of individual cases, but then also from the standpoint of trying to move a system along, right, for criminal justice reform. We started the first ever statewide conviction integrity unit. While people run around talking about bail reform 2 years ago, we did it in the AG's office. So we're trying to push change on the policy front, but we're really trying to use the work we do in this office to show every Pennsylvanian that they matter and that the rule of law applies fairly to them and that they have an advocate. They have a people's attorney general.
Well, and you bring up the church. I think it's a great illustration of what I'm talking about, which is that you do this thing, the grand jury report, which I assume was a politically existential moment for you. How I think the state is something like 30% Catholic. How is this going to play?
Yeah.
But then the grand jury recommends all these reforms, and the elected leaders, the legislature, is unwilling to adopt the reforms. That's my point, is that the attorney general's office is the one willing to roll up its sleeve and do the dirty work. And you just lost your. Are you there, Josh?
I'm here. Yep.
Okay. I lost your video, but I hear you.
Sorry, I'm here. Yep.
So I guess one of the a question about that is, first of all, were you afraid politically of that? Because you inherited this thing, you could have put the kibosh on it.
Right.
And secondly, we'll start with there, because I think I have a follow-up based on.
So just to give some context, right? So when you're running for this office, you have no idea what the grand jury is doing. And so after I was sworn in, I was told what grand jury investigations were there. And one of them that we discussed was really in its super early stages, allegations that a child or a few children may have been abused by a predator priest. And, I was asked, do you want to go forward with this? And I said, absolutely. Let's put real resources into this. We went from less than a handful of people working on this case to more than 150 people in my office working on it at its height. And I can tell you, Larry, we certainly never thought about the political ramifications of it. I can tell you a little bit more about that. Excuse my kids in the background. We never thought about the politics. We thought through a little bit toward the end, how are we going to talk about this, just to help take something so massive and so hard for people to comprehend, right? First off, it's impossible to comprehend an adult harming a child, let alone an adult figure who is the arm of God doing it, right? And a conspiracy and cover-up that went all the way to the Vatican. So we thought about how to choose our words and explain it in a way that it could be understood. But actually, it really wasn't until just before, moments before we could release this, when I was finally authorized by court to release it, where I called my wife and said, tried to explain why I had been acting so strange for the year and a half prior. And I did say to her at that moment, we're about to do this, and I've never felt more passionate about giving the survivors, these victims, the opportunity to finally be heard and finally believed, after years of being told that what they were keeping inside wasn't true, or hiding that truth inside of them. And that I was so proud to do it. And I said to my wife, this is probably the end of my political career for the reasons you just said, right? 30% or so of our voters are Catholic. And I said, I am totally at peace with that, totally at peace with it, because this is way more important than any election. And my wife, knowing nothing other than the 60 seconds of generality that I had just told her after a judge had authorized us to release this, said, I actually think you're going to be surprised that the reaction you're going to get from Catholics and parishioners is going to be very positive. And of course, I did what any good husband would do. I said, you have no idea what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And my wife was right. I mean, prior to COVID-19, when I was out and about every day, there wasn't a single day that went by where in, a year and a half that I didn't have a parishioner or a survivor of some sort of abuse come up to me and say thank you, and say that they had hoped real change would come as a result of this. Because here's the thing, the Catholic faith is a wonderful faith. And as a person of deep faith myself, I am inspired by the faith. But what I won't tolerate is some predator priest that weaponizes that faith and uses it as a tool to abuse kids. I just won't. And the good news is the Pope has acknowledged what happened and is pushing for change. 21 other state attorneys general have launched probes modeled after ours. The predator priests we identified that we could charge are behind bars and will be for some time. And these survivors who I've gotten to know have gotten their lives back. Bob Kirby is 83 years old. I went and spent time with him in his backyard.
Are you there, Josh?
Can you hear me? I am here. Larry? Larry?
Hey, there you are.
I am here, Larry. I think it's you.
Sorry about that. Did I got my I froze, huh?
Yeah.
So two fascinating things in that, and then we'll get to questions. One is that because it was a grand jury, you couldn't even tell your wife that what was going on. There should be a spousal exception to that, it seems to me. But okay. But then the other thing that amazes me is that were you? I think I read that you were actually arguing before the grand jury, and you had not been before in a courtroom as a lawyer.
Right.
That was an issue in the campaign. So.
Right.
If you could, so how weird was that? You couldn't tell anyone that you actually were in a court?
Right. And look, I can obviously never get into any communication with the grand jurors or anything like that, but I could just tell you that it was an experience where we were all in, my senior team, myself, and we did this work constantly. I mean, this is like as 24/7 as you can ever get in your life. And it was impossible not to bring it home. Right. And there were nights where I'd come home and looking back on it now, I was very distant from our 4 kids and Lori. And then there were probably other nights where I was smothering my kids with love and hugs and kisses. And they were like, Dad, get off me. What's the matter with you? But, this affects you in a deep way. But it can't possibly affect you in as deep a way as it does those victims, right? I was saying, I think when you got frozen, I mean, I spent time when the church was fighting to make sure our report would never see the light of day. And by the way, lying, right? So they would go to church on Sunday and go to the media and say, we want the truth to come out. And then they'd be fighting under seal in court, trying to make it so the report wouldn't come out, right? And there was this period of time where the public didn't know really what was going on. We were fighting to get it out under seal. And the way I was able to get through that time, because I felt that isolation, I couldn't really talk to people, is we got in our car and I drove around to the homes of survivors and just spent time talking to them and listening to them. And by the way, even them, I couldn't tell what was going on with the grand jury, even those that appeared before the grand jury. But I went to Bob Kirby's house in Bethlehem. Bob is 83 years old.
Mm.
We just sat in his backyard and talked. Bob was abused as a little boy. He was married for more than 50 years and never told his now deceased wife, never told his kids.
Mm.
And finally, his truth was shared, 60 something years later. Or getting to the Fortney sisters from the Harrisburg area. Nearly every one of those 5 sisters was abused, including one who was 18 months old. And these are the people that I was able to get to know. They are folks I will carry with me the rest of my life, and I will never, ever quit on them. And they have taught me the power of standing with people over these big, powerful institutions.
That's amazing. You've done to go to our faith a real mitzvah for those people, and I believe you still are in touch with many of those victims.
I am. They get together regularly. I've been with them, physically now. It's obviously over the phone and stuff like that. But I call them periodically just to check in. Obviously, they're battling so much serious mental health issues that result from this. It's one of the reasons why the grand jurors wanted to open up a window so that they could confront their abusers in court and be able to recover some resources to pay for their drug and alcohol counseling and mental health services and all of the other effects of this abuse.
Let's go to a couple of questions. And again, if you want to come on screen here with us, it would be good to see you. But there's one here that asks, what are the most effective near and long-term actions to eliminate corruption and corporate or private money influencing government more than citizens?
Well, look, from my perspective, as the chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, when you come across a politician who's broken the law, Democrat or Republican, you hold them accountable. You make your case, you arrest them, and if appropriate, you put them behind bars. That is important to show not just that individual that they did something wrong, but it shows the public that you're just simply not going to tolerate it. Public corruption just eats at the heart of our democracy. Larry, how many times have you and I talked about public policy issues, right? Where, maybe we don't necessarily agree on a tax policy or a healthcare policy or environmental policy. But when you have a corrupt public official in the arena debating those issues, you've robbed those constituents of the ability to have that honest debate. And so what we really need to do is make sure that we can get back to having a real debate over healthcare and tax policy and whatever the case may be. And there's serious debates to have now, particularly around workers' rights and things like that in the wake of COVID-19. And I think it is critically important that these corrupt public officials be held to account. You mentioned before we arrested 60 public officials, charged 60 public officials. I wish I could tell you that we would stop at 60, but there will be more. And that is a sad state of our democracy today.
It really is. Hey, we're joined by Toby, who one of the cool things about this platform is Toby joined us during the Ali Velshi town hall, and now he's
Ali's a cool guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and Ali, who John Oliver has nicknamed the Velsh, and Velsh. Toby asked a great question. Then Toby, what's on your mind?
I was on the Tolan interview as well, by the way. That was great too. I really appreciated that, Larry.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So first of all, Josh, thank you so much for your efforts against the Catholic Church. Like Larry was saying, I mean, I was so proud when I heard about everything that the state was doing. It seems like hopefully inspiring the same in other places as well, because I know this is a pattern for sure. So thank you so much for that. You're doing us proud. Yeah, and I appreciated your answer. That question I asked beforehand. I mean, corruption and money in politics is one of the things that I'm most passionate about. And I feel like unless we address that root cause, a lot of the other stuff that you've been talking about, and I can tell, it's not just lip service from you. Like you're clearly, you're definitely passionate about what you're talking about, and I appreciate that. So I'm assuming, getting money out of politics and expanding democracy, putting power back in the hands of the people, making it more of a democracy, less of a plutocracy, is something that I'm guessing you're trying to address. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about that. And then also voter suppression and gerrymandering, 2 other things that are impacting democracy as well, if you had any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, great questions. Look, I think what we need to do is have total openness and transparency when there's money in politics. The effect of the system now is that you got everything being hidden in super PACs, right? And everybody getting around these rules, this and that. And so I have long advocated for limits on donations. But the truth is, if you have a limit on donation, it just transfers everything over into a super PAC where there's no transparency. In a lot of ways, you've actually made the problem worse. And so I think you've got to have openness. You have to have transparency, and people need to be held responsible for whatever contribution they might take. In terms of gerrymandering and other reforms like that, I think you hit the nail on the head. If you have districts that produce representatives that are able to address a political agenda as opposed to a community's agenda, then it's going to be real hard to make change on the big ticket items we need to make change for, whether it's protecting our planet or dealing with student loans or, funding education, things like that. That's the challenge as a result of having these gerrymandered districts where you've got a lack of transparency in how these politicians are funded.
Thank you. Larry, actually, one last thing. Could you address the gas companies, with the pipelines running through our state is a big concern as well. And I've heard that they've been getting a public utility status, I believe, or some sort of, it seems to me, unjustified, a treatment to get the green light to do a lot of, potentially unsafe things for commercial gain and everything. So considering your commitment to the environment as well, I'd be interested to see what the state is doing to hold, those companies accountable, and, if you have any future plans in regards to that.
I'll tell you what, I am not in a position right now because of the work that I do and the secrecy surrounding a lot of that work to comment further. But if Larry invites us back in the future, I think I will not only have answered your question, but you will appreciate why I can't really talk about it right now.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. That sounds like something's up. One of our audience members has asked the obligatory question that I feel I must convey. Do you see yourself running for governor?
I hate those questions.
I know.
I'm running for re-election to be the people's attorney general, and that's what I'm focused on. And the truth is, it's pretty hard to even focus on those politics. I'm doing my job. I'm fighting my tail off for the people of Pennsylvania. We're producing real results, and I want to keep doing that work. I enjoy being an executive. I enjoy being in a job where you actually get stuff done. You don't just talk about things all day. And I'm going to continue to focus on doing that work for the people of Pennsylvania.
Terrific. Here's another one. There are a couple that take shots at people, at other public officials that I want to skip over. Okay. What do you recommend that parents do to encourage their children to appreciate the importance of service to the community? And I would say even more than that, is there something that government ought to do to make it easier for people to be engaged in their community?
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I spend a lot of time in the schools in Pennsylvania, obviously pre-COVID. And I'm still doing a lot of virtual stuff with students. The best thing government could do right now to get young people engaged is get the hell out of their way and stop telling them that it's not their turn and that their voice doesn't matter. The young people that I visit with, that I listen to, that I'm on Zoom calls with now very regularly, man, they are so smart and so dedicated. And we need to listen to them on a whole host of things. But here's two things we better listen up to them on. Number one is our planet and climate change. And number two is gun violence, because they see it in a very simple but serious way that the adults can't seem to get on both topics. And they understand that the future of their society depends on solving the climate crisis today. And they've got real ideas on how to do that. And they've also grown up in an environment, Larry, that you and I didn't have to grow up in, where every day they go to school, there's the possibility that there could be a shooting there. And, these are students I talk to all across Pennsylvania, in red counties and blue counties, who understand that we've got to take this violence, this gun violence, this senseless gun violence seriously. So older people need to get out of their way and listen to them. And they need to particularly listen to them on gun violence and climate change. And what I tell young people now is run for office. Don't wait your turn. Make sure that you email your congressperson directly. Show up at the town hall. You don't have to wait for mom or dad to get an invitation. You go and you be heard. And I am just blown away by their intellect. I will tell you that we never really had a serious internship program or anything like that in the AG's office. We started one so we could get these young minds in our office. We actually started an honors program like the Department of Justice has to reserve a certain number of our slots in the office to people who just graduated law school. I want these young minds around me, and I want them around the decision-making tables because they've got a lot of the answers that the adults simply don't have.
I noticed that in our chat on the side here, someone, Jess, suggested mandatory service for a year after high school, and it does like President Kennedy had the Peace Corps. Mm-hmm. Why not have a domestic corps where kids, in exchange for some sort of break on higher education, tuition or what have you, serve? So we implicate that.
I don't know that it should be mandatory, but here's what I've said: if you go to college, law school, grad school, whatever, and you amass a whole lot of student debt, like I have. By the way, I'm still paying it off. That if you commit yourself to service, we'll forgive all your loans. And not in the BS way that Betsy DeVos claims she's doing with the public service loan forgiveness program, which actually doesn't really help many people. But like in a meaningful way, do a couple of years of service, do 3 years of service, and we'll wipe out all your loans. And I believe that a lot of those young people will stay in service, and those that don't, who go into corporate America or go do something else, they will be enriched as a result of their time in service. We will be enriched. And I think they will be a more empathetic person going forward and recognize that there's a lot of people that need help in our society.
That's another fight that you took on was Navient. Is that how you pronounce the name? Or
Navient. Yeah,
Navient.
It's formerly Sallie Mae, the big student loan provider.
Yeah.
So they ripped off. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, Larry.
No, please.
Yeah, they ripped off students and families to the tune of $4 billion. Billion with a B, Larry. $1 billion. And I said, we're going to take them to court. Someone actually warned me, by the way, as we were going forward. They said, hey, General, you know they have a huge presence in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. That's up in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I said, yeah, I don't care. They stole $4 billion. They ripped these kids off. They ripped these families off. And we're going to get their money back. And so we took them on. And I love, when you take on these big corporations, what happens is you read in the newspaper the next day about how dumb you are, right? They attack you for being dumb. And then they file a motion to dismiss immediately. And then all of a sudden, the judge sides with us and doesn't dismiss the case. And then all of a sudden, maybe you're not so dumb, right? And then they want to talk and they want to try to work through things. So my view is you've got to stand up for people who are getting ripped off by these big corporations. And these student loan companies are among the worst. And listen, here's the thing. If you're watching this right now and you have student debt like I do, and you're still paying it off like I am, you know what I'm talking about. This inhibits your ability to do certain things because you're paying that debt off. Now, in fairness, I got a great education, right? No one forced me to do that. But there has to be a way that it is not as onerous on the students and their families. And for those of you who are thinking, to hell with Shapiro because I don't have any student debt and I don't have any kids with student debt. Here's the thing. You're being robbed too. Because if that big-brained recent college graduate can't go out and do something innovative that's going to help cure cancer or develop an app that you're going to use or do something really monumental that you're going to benefit from, and they instead have to go take some job somewhere else just to pay their student debt off, we all lose as a society. And that makes us far worse off. And so it's bad enough to have a lot of student debt because these higher education institutions cost so darn much money. It's even worse when a student loan company like Navient adds $4 billion on the price tag.
Well put. You mentioned our fearless leader, President Trump, earlier. I've been interested in how you've been strategic about when to sue, when not to sue. You and other attorney general, but you're not in every suit. Can you walk us through what your calculus is? Because it seems well thought out and strategic.
So I'm not sure that strategic is the right word, in that we really just go through the same test every time, which is what this guy is doing violating the law, period. I don't worry about whether I agree or disagree with his decision. Look, if I sued Donald Trump every time I disagreed with him, I would have sued him 1,000 times at this point. It doesn't work that way. That's not the power that was given to me as the attorney general. The power that was given to me is to protect your rights, your legal rights and your constitutional rights. And so when he violates the law, I go to court. And by the way, when I go to court, I win. We were just in the United States Supreme Court last week defending women's access to contraception. We sued the president after he wrote a rule that would have taken away people's access to contraception based on the moral views of a particular CEO. Now, to be clear, if Pennsylvania's rights aren't being violated, I don't go to court. So let me give you an example. You remember when the president said he was going to build his border wall, and he was going to take funding from the Department of Defense budget that Congress had already passed. Remember this? This was, I'm losing track of time, but I think this was probably about 8 months ago or so now. And I think nearly every Democratic attorney general sued the president over that. And I didn't. And actually, a lot of people on the left were pretty mad. But I said, look, I'm the lawyer for the people. And the first rule of being a lawyer, if you're going to file a suit, is do you have standing? Do you have the ability to make that argument? Well, the president, even though I think what he was doing was ill-advised, wasn't taking $1 away from funding for the people of Pennsylvania or any military depots or anything else here in the Commonwealth or a single military contract here. I didn't feel like I had standing to sue, and I didn't. So I don't go to court as many times as many of my other colleagues do. But when I do go to court, we win, and I go there to defend people's rights. And for those last point, I see someone just popped up. Michael just popped up on the screen, so I'll yield to him here in a second. But just real quick, the reality of the situation is that you have certain rights as a Pennsylvanian. So let me give you an example. Article 2, Section 27, Article 1, Section 27 says that you have a right to clean air and pure water in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's your constitutional right. And so when the president does something that takes away that right, why wouldn't I go to court to defend that? You have a constitutional right here in Pennsylvania that. And we've gone to court multiple times on the environmental front and won every single time. And I'm going to continue to stand up for the people of Pennsylvania. And those who don't want me to go to court to defend their constitutional rights, I think that probably speaks more to a partisan agenda than anything else.
Before we get to Michael, did I notice that on that contraceptive case, it was someone from your office that argued before the Supreme Court? I usually see a high-priced big name
Correct.
argue. What was the thinking on that?
It's an interesting question. So typically an attorney general will go hire some big name from the outside to come in and argue the case.
Right.
Here's my view. I hired these people to work for me in the Office of Attorney General. They bust their humps every single day. They're incredible people, and they're working really hard. And by the way, they could probably all make more money in the private sector. What would it say to them after laboring for 2 years on this case that when you finally have an audience in front of the 9, that you're going to go bring somebody else in because you don't trust them to make a good enough argument? I have faith in my team. That's their job. And I thought that Mike Fisher and Amy Thompson and Jacob Boyer did a hell of a good job making the case. And we'll see what the justices say.
Great. Michael Adler's with us. Michael asked a question. He comes to all our events. It's great to see you. Asked a question, was it last week? The Rebecca Reinhart event. What's on your mind, Michael?
Josh, good to see you. Hope you and your family are doing well. Thanks for being here tonight. My question,
Likewise, Michael.
thank you. In a spirit of bipartisanship, we're always looking for sort of good future leaders, current leaders. Can you name a Pennsylvania leader that you admire, both a Democrat and a Republican? A young leader, it could be a county leader, a state leader, a local leader, one in a Democrat, one Republican that you think is doing a great job, maybe during this pandemic or otherwise.
There are a lot of leaders on both sides of the aisle that I admire and that I work closely with. And I think, Michael, you know, I try and work with Democrats and Republicans, particularly in this job. When I think about emerging leaders, you mentioned Rebecca Reinhart. I see Rebecca as one of those people. I see, State Rep Patty Kim in Harrisburg, a Democrat, State Representative Austin Davis in Allegheny County, an emerging leader, State Representative Brian Cutler, a Republican from Lancaster. I see them as emerging leaders on the state level and people who, while I may not agree with them on every issue, you can sit down and really have a dialogue with and work through things. And I pride myself on being able to work with people on both sides of the aisle, even folks that, I may disagree with on an issue. But those are a few names that come to mind. I will say, in addition to that, there are probably too many to name, but I work with all 67 DAs and, just in the suburban region of Philadelphia where I know you're from, you've got Matt Weintraub, a Republican from Bucks County, who I think is a super guy. And then you've got, some terrific new leaders in Deb Ryan and Jack Stolzheimer, who are Democrats, and Kevin Steele, who's been around now for a term and a half or so, a little bit more than a term. Democrats and Republicans all working together to try and do good for the community.
Yeah. Thank you. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Keep up.
Thanks, pal. You too. Be well.
Yep.
Thank you, Michael. I think it was Woody Allen who said that 90% of life is just showing up. And that might be apocryphal attributed to him. But I think that about you and that's not a backhanded compliment when it comes to your 2016 campaign. Yeah. Can you walk us through, because I think you made reference to this earlier, there is implied in here an antidote to Trumpism or to partisanship. You ended up, I think, getting maybe 300,000 more votes than either presidential candidate in 2016.
Right.
And I think you kind of did it by just showing up in places like that where other Democrats don't normally go. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, look, on election night, I was the third name on the ballot. It was Hillary Clinton for president. She lost. Katie McGinty for Senate. She lost. And then Josh Shapiro for attorney general, and I won. And actually got more votes than anybody in the state that night. And we spent some time afterwards looking back, and there were a couple hundred, maybe 300,000 people, 250,000 people or so, who must have voted for Donald Trump and Josh Shapiro. And obviously we couldn't be more ideologically different. And what I found in my experience campaigning, and certainly what I have found since, is that you need to show up and you need to get into these communities around Pennsylvania and listen to people. And a lot of the folks I listen to don't agree with me on my strong stance defending a woman's right to choose, or my belief that our LGBTQ brothers and sisters should be treated equally. But they do appreciate the fact that I showed up and understand their economic angst, understand their security angst, right? Their welfare in their community. And that I'm willing to fight like hell for them. And I'm reminded of a story that happened after I got elected. But one of the lawsuits that I brought was against a couple of gas companies up in the northeastern and north central part of our state. There's a county called Bradford County, way up top, right? And Bradford County residents, a bunch of other counties in that area, were being ripped off by these drillers who came to their homes, asked if they could drill on their lands, got permission to drill for natural gas on their lands, and then never paid these people the royalties that they were owed. And so we sued them. And we're fighting to make sure that people get every penny they are owed from these drilling companies. And I said to my team, I want to go up to that area and have a town hall meeting and update people on what's going on. And it's a long drive to get there. And we got there and it was a cold night. And a lot of folks may have been the first time they saw a Democrat up in those parts. And I probably in the next election won't get many votes there. It doesn't really matter. What matters is you show up and you let people know you're there to fight for them. And I remember one of the guys after, I did the town hall, I went down the audience just to talk to people. And one guy was wearing a MAGA hat, one of those red MAGA hats, and a Trump t-shirt. He told me he didn't vote for me. I thanked him for his honesty because, of course, after you win an election, everybody likes to tell you that they voted for you, even though you probably didn't. But anyway, he said, I disagree with you on this. I disagree with you on that. I disagree with you on the other thing. But at least you're here tonight and you're fighting for me and you earned my respect. And that matters a ton to me. And here's a warning to the Democratic Party. If we don't get our acts together and compete everywhere, not just in certain communities around Pennsylvania, as we did in 2016, we're going to lose again. I'm serious about that. Joe Biden and anyone else running in this country needs to show up in places like Bradford County and needs to show up in communities that feel like Democrats have forgotten them, feel like they've forgotten, the promises that they've made. And don't appreciate the anger. And when our national leaders dismiss that very real anger that exists in a lot of these communities, that's bad politically, and it's also bad for those communities. And I refuse to play those kinds of politics. That's why I show up. I can't physically do it right now, which is one of the worst parts of this. I enjoy being out talking to people. So we're doing it through Zoom and all other ways to communicate. But you got to show up. You got to listen to people. You got to appreciate their anger. You got to accept the differences where they are, and you got to let them know that you're fighting for them.
I think I want to explore, and then we'll get going because I've kept you long enough. But I do want to explore that last point in terms of because and you and I have talked about this. Democrats often make the mistake of thinking that voting is not an emotional act. Right, you can't win with position papers alone, and I believe that Donald Trump got 13% of voters who voted for Barack Obama twice, and that was simply because there was a component of the electorate that felt ignored, let down, and so there is a lesson in your race and in how you conduct, which is just showing up. There's a difference between, Bradford County, you're right, you might not win it, but maybe you get 30% instead of 20%.
Right.
Which makes
Look, in every one of those counties, we outperformed Hillary Clinton. And the reality is ideologically, Hillary Clinton and I are left of center. I mean, there's probably not a huge amount of difference, right? I mean, there's some around the edges, but I was to the left of center in communities that were far right. But if you show up and you look them in the eye and you say, I understand the opioid crisis in your community, and here's what I'm going to do about it. And then, by the way, actually deliver on it the way we have, I think you earn people's respect that way, even if they disagree with you ideologically. I think in government and our politics, we need to get back to that. We need to get back to communicating to everyone. We need to get back to, empathizing more. And I, for one, appreciate the anger that so many people have. They've been fed a lot of BS for a long time. And in 2016, they got sick of it. And now we see the result of that. I hope that that'll change in 2020. And I know, obviously, I'm going to do everything in my power, not just to make sure I get reelected, but that Joe Biden gets elected president. I don't think we can do 4 more years of this. But I don't think that in fighting to defeat Donald Trump, that we need to attack the people who voted for him. I think we need to try to understand them, and we need to communicate with them. And for some, we're not going to be their cup of tea. But for a lot, if you show them respect and you listen to them, and they listen to you and might like what they have to hear.
You mentioned the opioid epidemic, and one of the questioners was questioning your commitment to the fight, given that that according to the questioner, your numbers of narcotics agents has diminished. So I don't know if that's true. So I'm hesitant about asking questions that
it's the opposite. It's increased pretty significantly. And I've been asking the legislature in every single budget to increase the number of agents we had. When Tom Corbett got elected Attorney General, I guess it was like 16 years ago or something now, he had 31% more agents than I had in the office of Attorney General the day I got sworn in. Now, part of that is because of what we talked about before. Because of my elected predecessor, you know, a lot of the office had left, right? They didn't want to work for her. We've built that back up, and we've added training, and we've added a terrific complement of leaders. So it's actually the opposite of what the questioner said.
But you've also said, and I think you're 100% right on that, this, you're not going to arrest your way out of this, right? This is a much more, needs to have a much more holistic approach than the old law enforcement approach.
I'm the first guy to run for this office saying drug addiction is a disease, not a crime, right? And we take that with us every single day. I also told my team on day one, you want to talk about setting a tone? I said, I'm not going to go out and do press conferences about the number of arrests you make. I'm just not. I said, I am going to go out and do a press conference when you arrest the big guy who is infecting this community with poison, right? And now as a result of that arrest, kids can come back out and play again. I will talk about that, but we're not going to be judged by numbers. We're going to be judged by results. Similarly, I'm not going to give the pharmaceutical companies a pass. And so I forged a coalition and talk about Michael Adler's question on bipartisanship. Two Democratic attorneys general, myself and the one from North Carolina, two Republicans, Texas and Tennessee, have worked for 2 years to bring about a $50 billion settlement with the opioid manufacturers and 3 distributors and 1 manufacturer to be able to drive real resources into treatment back in our communities. We're still working our way through this. And obviously it's a lot of money and a lot of companies and a lot of lawyers. We're getting there, but we're not letting the pharmaceutical companies off. And we know that to get out of this crisis, you got to pump a ton of resources into treatment. And one of the things I'm fearful of is with the massive cuts that are going to have to come to our state and local budgets, not just here in Pennsylvania, but across the country. You know, my fear is that you're going to cut social services at the time where we need them most.
Right. Well, this has been great. A final question will be right back where we started, which is on hoops. Have you watched the Jordan doc, and do you see yourself in him?
All right. So let's talk about, if we can talk about hoops for a minute. So first off, I still love basketball. I actually coach. We have 4 kids. I coach 2 of my kids in a travel league, and so I make the time to be there, coach them, the other kids, and you know, I love it. It's one of the most rewarding things I do. I also still play, and one of the nice things about being home with your family is every day we've had a pickup game with the kids and I, and so it's been it actually gets really competitive. I got knocked in the nose. I don't know if you could tell a few times just the other day. My nose is big enough as it is, so I still play. I still enjoy it. And I love everything about basketball. I'm a huge Sixers fan. Someone asked me the other day, your friend AJ Raju said, who's your favorite Sixer of all time? And I said, Mo Cheeks, which surprised him that it wasn't the doctor or anybody else. But the reality is I love the floor generals. I love the point guards. I love the people that make the system run. I'm trying to train both of my younger boys to be point guards and tell them to stop shooting and pass the ball more. I did watch The Last Dance. Here's my thing. I believe Jordan is the GOAT. I actually posted my top 10 on Twitter the other day. So anybody who wants to head to Josh Shapiro, PA, you can check out my top 10 of all time and argue with me. I've heard time and time again that Karl Malone doesn't belong on the list and Bill Russell does. And in part, it's because I hate the Celtics so much. I couldn't put 2 Celtics on my list. Larry Bird was already on, but you're probably right. Bill Russell should be on there. Check it out. Let me know what you think. But
you had Karl Malone and not Charles Barkley?
I did. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And I didn't have the doctor on there either. So, but here's the thing. I think The Last Dance was extraordinary because Jordan has been so private, right? And so it gave us a look at him in a way that I certainly don't remember at the time and haven't seen since. I found myself after last night's episode wanting more. Like, I wanted to know, he had his kids on there for a little bit last night. I want to know more about what it was like growing up with Michael as your dad. I wanted to know more from other teammates. I wanted to know, just like they had a little bit from Kobe, may he rest in peace. I want to know a little bit about how LeBron felt, and so I wanted more. I would have liked 20 episodes, and I think his competitive fire is extraordinary. It's something that I'm a very competitive person, as you may imagine, and I have that fire burning inside me. I don't know that anyone has the fire burning at the level that he does. He is just extraordinary. And you think about it, right? We were robbed of the year and a half he played baseball,
right?
And then we were robbed by that early retirement because of Jerry Krause and the guys who didn't bring him back, right? And so he could have probably won 7 if they brought him back.
I think that's right.
Extraordinary. And the thing that I thought was most exceptional about him was the way he made everyone around him better. Right. The way he was able to get the most out of Paxton and Kerr, right? The way he was able to take these role players and make them excel, like a Ron Harper. The way he was able to turn Pippen into one of the best to ever play. Pippen would have been great, but he elevated him. He made everyone better. He demanded excellence, but he always did what he demanded of them. And that's the sign of a great leader.
The series does a great job of that, of showing him berating his teammate Scotty Burrell
remember that?
Over and over again, and then you see Scotty Burrell like step up and score 23 points in a big game, right. And it's like, whoa, okay, it worked.
Right. I mean, it was really amazing, and to be able to repeat like that. I mean, no other team is like that. I mean, you've seen dominant teams in recent memory, right? The New England Patriots, is a good example of that. But I don't know that any team in professional sports was able to dominate the way that the Bulls did those 6 years. It's just extraordinary.
That's right. This should put to rest the LeBron versus Jordan, and LeBron's terrific, but it puts it to rest.
I fight with my kids about very little. This is something that we have real fights about, and I think now they appreciate that Jordan really was the GOAT. My guy Ruben, who's 9 now, I have to think because I've got 4. He's 9, and when Jordan hit that shot over Elo, Ruben commented that Jordan just stayed up there like longer than anyone else. I'm like, right, that's the thing. He could just elevate and stay up there, and it was just amazing what he could do. Amazing.
Well, this is terrific. This
is my guy Ruben, who didn't think Ruben? Jordan was the GOAT before, but now you do, right? All right.
How old is Ruben?
He's 9.
Wow. And so he's not beating you yet on the hard court.
He is very quick. So
but wait till that day.
Yeah, if he could turn now, I will say my other kids are coming close to be able to beat me. And my Max has a step back shot. He's 11. I'm always like, come on, don't take those Steph Curry like shots, and then he makes them. I don't know how he does that. So he does a step back that I simply can't block.
Isn't it amazing the way we're getting way off topic here? But isn't it amazing the way that the Golden State Warriors revolutionized the game? It is a higher percent. I grew up thinking the goal is to shoot as high a percentage shot as you could, which meant closer to the basket. That's no longer the case. Steph Curry from 40 is the highest percentage shot.
There's a fascinating stat chart from the early 2000s that show positions where you had at least 200 shots in a game. And of course, the paint is really crowded. There were a few shots around 3, and everything else was those mid-range jumpers, which is what Jordan took over and over again, in the 90s. And now fast forward to, I think it was like 2016 or 2018. I can't exactly remember. It's about a 15, 16-year difference. And it's the paint nothing from mid-range and everything from three. And that's Steph Curry. I mean, that's the impact he's had on the game.
It's fascinating. And the impact Steve Kerr has had, which is part of the Jordan tree.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We could talk hoops all night, but we're probably boring this civic-minded audience now.
We've lost all of the viewers as a result of this conversation.
Mr. Attorney General, I really appreciate you taking the time and for spending this time with us, and also for your years of public service, because it really you talked earlier about the people who work for you. You could go make a mint at some law firm, Stradley Ronan, but you're serving us, and the Citizen exists to hold people like you accountable, but also thank you for your service.
I really appreciate that, Larry, and right back at you. I mean, in this time where journalism is so under fire, where there is a lot of misinformation, and it's real hard to know what you can trust, and it's really hard to find things that you read and then know how to take action from. That sort of jumping off that you want to do after you read stuff. You're giving people things that are factual. You're giving people things to think about, whether I agree or disagree with the opinions expressed. And I think that we need more of that kind of journalism. And I'm glad to see the Citizen has made it through all these years and is doing so well. It's a really important part of our culture in the Philadelphia region. So thank you, man. We appreciate you.
Well, I can't thank you enough. That means a lot coming from you. And to all of you, we'll see you tomorrow night for Bruce Katz and Dayton, Ohio Mayor Nan Whaley, which should be just as fascinating in terms of innovative ways that cities can rebuild now. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much, Mr. Attorney General, and we'll see everyone tomorrow night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.